So now that we've gone through a first pass of smooth skin weighting, this is the point that we're leaving off at. The volumes are more or less working together. So now we're going to go into another level of refinement just to go through that process. We're not going to paint weights on the entire range of motion here, but rather I'm going to work on the mouth opening, smooth this out a little, as well as all of this lip motion. Okay, so I'm going to truncate the frame range just to encompass the relevant range of motion, then dive into painting weights. So once again, I'm going to use the Paint Smooth Skin Weights tool to do the bulk of this work. So select the mesh, skin, edit smooth skin, paint skin weights tool. Then open the option box. I'm going to set my brush down to a soft brush. Set my opacity, start with 0.25. And then change this to add. We're going to start adding in weights. I'm going to set my value to 0.125. The first thing I'm going to start with is this mouth opening. So what we want to do is we want to take some of the joints of the upper lip and add that influence so that we'll pull the lower lip up. Okay, so I'm going to go in and find our up lip. Okay, there's our up lip 3. Let's change our brush to the Gaussian brush and lower our value to 0.05. And just start painting away. Now this process, once again, we're not going to go through the entire face of the character, but just to go through a little bit of the process. Roughing out the weights be a pretty quick process. In a little over 30 minutes, I was able to get it to this point, and that's with a lot of talking and so forth. But just in general, the refinement in most art takes quite a bit of time. As you can see here, I'm painting in pretty small values. Basically just trying to extend the deformations. Again, I'm just working on the left side because I'm going to mirror it over to the right once I'm satisfied or reach a point where I want to see what it looks like mirrored. Okay, so now we're going to move to the second upper lip joint. Add some of that weight in here. So now you can see already what I'm going for here with the left lip compared to the right, where we have this sharp break here. And here I'm trying to add a little more influence from the upper lip. Let's add a little bit more here. A very small brush, very small values in opacity. And usually my thinking here is I'll start by defining a curve and then just painting the influences, where once I have that curve defined, then I'll go in and keep painting until that's all worked out. And typically, since they're going to be potentially fairly broad deformations on this character, I usually what I call feather or extend the weights out fairly broadly. I know already this is going to take a lot of back and forth. I'm going to have to do some work with the lower lip motion, which is later on in this frame range, where the lower lip joints sort of pucker outward. I'm going to have to add some lower jaw weights to keep those in place, but will come a little later. So once again, we can see this rounding occurring compared to what we have on the opposite side. Now we're going to pull downward. So here we're going to use the lower jaw to do that. Once again, working at fairly small values. Just sort of defining this line. And once again, I personally prefer to work with the paint weights tool, although some people, when working on this level of refinement, would prefer to use the component editor, so that way they can type in very specific values. I think it's a matter of preference. I don't think one is particularly better than the other. Just choosing a workflow that works best for you, that where you can achieve not only the best results, but achieve them as quickly as possible. Go back to the Gaussian brush. I'm adding in, once again, I'm using the Gaussian brush with 0.125 opacity, and I'm adding in 0.05 value. So these are very small values that I'm adding in here. The effect is quite visible. And a part of that is because it's such a wide, gaping expression. These joints have a lot of room to play, so to speak. Cursor freaked out. Okay, so once again we can see a little bit of the rounding occurring here, as opposed to the sharp break there. Scroll through this range of motion, see what we have. You see, so we're getting motion in both directions. When the lower lip drags down, it's pulling the points up toward the bottom, and then when the top of the head rotates up, it's tugging upward a little. Once again, we're working on giving it a more broad deformation, which also lends to a more organic feel. Okay, a little interpenetration there we're going to deal with later. Okay, so now this is the next section we're going to deal with. First of all, I'm going to lock this down a bit. This chin is being rotated a bit too much here. So I'm going to step back one jaw joint and start adding in weights. I'm going to up my values here, as well as my opacity. Okay, once again, just trying to lock this lower jaw area down just a bit. I'm actually going to want to go back in and add a little bit back in. Okay, and even up here, I'm going to pull this back a bit. So once again, just playing this little balancing act, just trying to sort of average the deformations between these two jaw joints in this area. So now I'm extending this last jaw joint deformation further back into the mouth. Okay, now this area is going to need quite a bit of work. So what we need to do, particularly with the lower lip, is we need to lock these vertices down, which means adding the low lip, the last jaw joint into the influence. So here we're going to go to low jaw 5. I'll make that low jaw 6 and use that to lock down these vertices. often with dealing with a problem area which needs an extensive amount of work as we have here, often I'll push it too far, bring it back a little far, knowing that I can always add back the influence that I've taken away or a small portion of that. But I just want to sort of resolve whatever interpenetrations or deformation issues first in a very quick and broad sense, and then go back in and finesse it. But the first thing is to simply solve the problem first. So here you can see I'm pushing it a little too far. I know I'm going to go back in and add some of the lip influence back into this area. And this lip area in particular is going to require, bulk of the deformation work, I believe, for this face. We're dealing with just the primary joints. I'm allowing for a fairly broad amount of rotation, a wide range of rotation on those lip joints. So it's going to tug these verts around quite a bit, and the corners of the mouths are, like the shoulder, can be a notoriously difficult area to wrangle and get those deformations working properly. Okay, we're getting a little closer. Okay, so just gradually pulling the corner in a cascading fashion further and further back. What I mean by cascading is just basically tapering the weights. Starting with the pulling it back the most toward the corner, and then tapering those weights as we go further and further away from the corner of the mouth. So there'll be some of the end jaw joint influence, but we reduce that as the distance increases toward the end of the lip, bottom lip in this case. Once again, don't be afraid to go too far or to experiment. You may not know, clearly what combination of influences you want to come into play in this area, because you can always either revert to an older model. And one thing I'm not doing here, just for continuity's sake at the demo, is saving often. I tend to save quite often when I'm working, particularly when I'm doing something that I'm not 100% certain of the effect. It makes sense to save a copy before moving into uncharted territory, so you can always revert back. Or even in this case where I'm just forging ahead without saving a copy that I can revert back to, I know that I can go in and add influence that I've taken away, or new influences that will help me deal with whatever problems I've painted myself into. Let's see how this is looking. Okay, not bad. Okay, so now we're going to add some of the do a little bit of work on the up lip here. Okay, go back to the lower jaw. Pull this back down. I know that as I'm doing this, it's going to be quite a bit of back and forth with this weighting, the weighting changes I'm making now, and the weighting changes just to get the mouth to open properly. Now, some of the changes that I'm making now are likely to affect what I had done earlier. So I'll have to go in and make sure that, once again, the balancing act, that I get all this deformation working along with the mouth opening. And it's going to take a little work to get that, balance working out right, but it's not an impossible thing to do. It just tends to be quite time consuming, especially in an area as dynamic and critical as the corner of a mouth. Although this character isn't intended to speak, his range of expressiveness will not be at all limited. Okay, so in a minute here I'm going to mirror this over, see what we got. Okay, so let's mirror this. We're going to use the same selection set that we had created earlier. So select Edit, Quick Select Set, Center Head Verts. So it selects everything except for the center line. We're going to mirror from left to right. So Skin, Edit Smooth Skin, Mirror Skin Weights. Once again, from the previous lesson, we had set those to mirror across the YZ axis, which cuts through the center of the character. So there's the YZ plane. We're going from positive X to negative X. So we're mirroring from left to right. Okay, so now back to the balancing act. Let's go back in and fix all this. Okay, start pulling these up. I'm going to try and continue this line here. So as you can see here, on the face, the brows are a very dynamic area, and the mouth definitely. On this character in particular, we're going to need to do a lot of work on the mouth, as well as the throat of this character, which is something we'll cover a little later, just doing a whole rigging treatment and deformation treatment in the throat area. Okay, try and wrap this up. Again, I don't think anyone wants to watch me completely finish this, but hopefully we'll get an indication of just workflow ideas, just the level of refinement you can get just by painting the weights on this face. So now I'm going to start pulling in the opposite direction with the low jaw. Once again, working with the Gaussian brush as well as the smooth brush, and very small opacity values as well as paint weight values. I'm working very quickly here. when I'm done, this will, in all likelihood, require another pass of smoothing. Okay, I'm going to do a little bit more work here, mirror it over, and then call it a day with this lip weighting, knowing full well that this isn't even close to being done. Once again, the goal is just to show the process, and just so how I'm trying to sort of create these lines, these edges that flow fairly smoothly from one end to the other, as well as deal with major deformation issues once we move beyond the that first stage, where we're just roughing in the weights. Okay. So in general, what I'd like to do is go in and even these edges out even more. For instance, this edge I would probably move down to there, this edge down a bit more, definitely move this edge down, nudge that down a little, just even them out in general. Okay. Once again, that's just a demonstration of another level of refinement. Okay, just can't help myself. I'm going to go in and add some work here. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is, here's the head. Let's get in the balancing act. Have the upper head pushing back just a bit, and then I'm going to move in the opposite direction and push these verts forward so that they don't penetrate too deeply into the skull. I think one thing I like doing, one reason I like using the paint tool rather than the component editor is it is faster for me, but also it adds not a randomness, but a more, I think, a more organic feel, where it's not quite perfect. And I actually like that. I mean, we're working with an organic creature here, so I like having a little bit of, with the weights working in a logical manner, an artistic manner, but then having something of a organic feel, which typically means randomness, as well as some fairly extreme subtlety. Once again, I'm just blazing through this. Okay, I'm actually gonna lower this down a bit more and push back just a little here. Another thing I'm going to do is just add a little bit of jaw motion. You see how this center row here is a little stiff. Okay, push this jaw influence further back. This neck area, this throat area is an area we're going to address in more detail a little later. Okay, add a little bit of the upper head, just to pull this jaw forward just a bit. I can also see I'm going to need to pull near the corner of the eye down a little. Okay, so to pull this back a bit also. Again, it's usually a balance. We'll pull it back as well as forward in the opposite direction. Okay, let's mirror this over. So once again, from where we came, this is a lot more rounded, a lot broader distribution of the deformations. There's still quite a bit of work to go. We're still able to achieve a fairly broad range of deformation. This is just to show just a second level of refinement, more of a workflow here, where we started out with the default bind, and then we went to a first pass of weighting, where we're painting in very broad deformation fixes. And then typically once we've worked out volumes and major problems, then I'll go back in with another pass and do more refinement, and quite often after that, you know, a second and third pass of more refined weighting. And of course, that includes passing this off to the animator, having them contort it in ways you would have never envisioned, and then bringing it back again to help deal with the animation needs as defined by the animator. Once again, quite a bit more smoothing that will be necessary here. Here's an area here. And this area needs more smoothing as well as that. Deal with some of the odd deformations here, but once again, that will be in continued weighting adjustment in this, but not something you want to watch me do for the next 48 hours. So we'll end that lesson here with hopefully just some ideas on just how that layered approach to refinement works.